Anyway, guys, well, that's a big act of faith, isn't it? All right. Just a little bit of my background so you know where I'm coming from. And started out with psych services 40-something years ago as a drug and alcohol counsellor. Moved across to corrective services as a probation and parole officer. Ended up running correctional centres in southeast Queensland. Had a desk about 2 floors up here, Ampol House we used to call it then, rather than 44 Herschel. I had to ask, where's 44 Herschel? Somebody said, oh, it's Ampol House. So okay, righto. Sat on parole boards as so-called expert in drugs and alcohol on occasions, helped set up the Queensland drug courts, set up corrective services in Queensland for drug testing, do a little bit of work for defence, as what the troops love to laugh about, intelligence and officer, the 2 words getting put together. You can work out drugs and poisons, the sort of stuff that I'm probably working with. And in my spare time, about 15 years ago, we set up this practice. And we do lots of work with industry, so big mining companies and places like that. We go in, we do training in drug and alcohol testing, we do testing, we do consulting. And we've started to branch more and more and more into the legal area, particularly with the hair testing and other types of testing, which I'm going to talk about today. I did prosecute for about 19 years. So being with a group of lawyers like this, I like to ask questions that have got a few little tricks to them to see what sort of reactions I get. So the first one will be, if people are honest, how many of you are game to admit you've ever used drugs? Oh, not many. What a pack of bullshit artists. What about that? How about them? Uh-huh. Oh yeah, definitely that one. And some of them? Yeah. Okay. As soon as we say drugs, your clients do it, you do it, we all do it. We think of illicit stuff. There's going to be more deaths in Queensland and Australia this year from people using legal substances, including alcohol, in the workplace and on the roads than there are from illicit substances, believe it or not. So illicit substance deaths are actually in smaller proportion to legal substance deaths. Part of the reason for that, I think, is that people get a bit cunning when they're using illicit substances and they have people watching out for them, or they're trying to be very careful with quantities and whatever. When it's legal drugs, oh, the doctor prescribed it, that's okay. He did say don't drink with it, but oh, you know, it's me, right? I can have a few. People don't think, so a bit unfortunate. Can I get a bit of an idea with the group of 10 drugs there, or 10 classes of drug, and please ask questions at any stage, because that'll be what makes the session really interesting. There's about 10 drugs or groups of drugs there. Can you tell me how many, just a number, between 0 and 10 of those you think are illegal, as in not legal? Somewhere between 0 and 10. Ask questions as needs. 2? Somebody said something? 2, 3, 5?
I'd say 1.
1? Anybody want to make a comment about the groups that are up there?
So that's whether it's therapeutic or not.
Right, good. Depends on whether it's therapeutic or not. Depends on whether it's been prescribed or not. Depends on what country you're in. Depends on what state you're in. Synthetic cannabinoids, right, are not legal anywhere in Australia, but they are legal in some parts of the world. Things like alcohol we think of as being legal, yeah? We're over 18 living in Australia. Try that being under 21 in the States. Try downtown Abu Dhabi, driving your car and being over the limit, because not only do they arrest you and lock you up, you'll get 6 strokes of the rattan across your bare backside and they will confiscate your motor vehicle. You don't get it back. Okay, so different laws, different countries. Cannabis, we've got cannabis trials on in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. So long as they meet the parameters, people can actually legally use cannabis. We had a look at Colorado and California last year. We went over and had a look at their trials, or wasn't trials, they'd actually legislated to make it okay for personal use. Guess what? They saved your seat up the front. All right, come on in. All the good churchgoers always sit at the back as soon as they get in. Colorado didn't account for the fact that cannabis actually causes a lot of psychiatric problems. So their psych hospitals were absolutely overflowing. California, they allow their people in a lot of places to sleep on the street, and they're fairly gentle with moving them on, particularly in San Francisco. So what you've got now is, whereas you had 3 or 4 major streets that were crowded with people who are homeless in cities, now you might have 10 or 12. And certainly San Francisco was a bit of an eye-opener for us as to how many people are living on the street. Opiates or opioids, legal in some formats and not in others. Up until 1 February last year, we could buy codeine across the counter, couldn't we? But we're very concerned about what we're seeing happening in the States, where there's been an opioid crisis there for about the last 3 years. So we've actually made it illegal to have it unless it's on script. But, you know, even heroin is legal in some countries, 5 of them in fact, that I'm aware of, and Britain is one of those countries. You can buy heroin on script if you are a registered addict, or if you're in the final stages of a painful death. So they call it diamorphine rather than heroin if it's illegal. So if you're watching British television and you hear somebody saying they died of a diamorphine overdose, it was actually heroin, but it had been prescribed. So different countries, different rules. We can have codeine here on script, but if you go into China, including Hong Kong, make sure you get a letter from your doctor talking about your codeine-based medication, otherwise you can be locked up for having narcotics. So different countries. How about cocaine? Is that legal in Australia? No. No? Oh, you haven't got used to my trick questions yet. Okay. You'd think so, wouldn't you? And I certainly did until a few years back, where we actually got called in to one of the hospitals to have a look at setting up a secret camera on their drug safe, because the cocaine was going missing and it wasn't going up the nostrils that it was supposed to be going up post-op. So lots of nostrils that were hurting and still bleeding, and one set of nostrils, as it turned out, that was doing very nicely. Thank you very much if that's your take on it. And we caught that guy on camera, and he no longer works in hospitals. So different uses. Caffeine, all right, not legal if you're a racehorse in Australia. Not legal in quantities above a certain level with super athletes. But you know, the no-dose tablets some of you might have even used as students when you were trying to stay awake, they're made from caffeine powder, which is illegal now in the US, following the death of a young college wrestler over there. He had 1 teaspoonful, which is the equivalent of about 25 cups of coffee, and he went into arrhythmia and arrest. Nicotine, we can't actually buy nicotine in Queensland. You can buy cigarettes that have got nicotine packed into it, but if you want to buy liquid nicotine for your e-cigarettes, you've got to go to Western Australia to get it. It's the only state that allows it to come in, courtesy of a murder by a doctor here in Queensland 140 years ago or something, where he murdered 2 of his patients by hitting them with nicotine shots. So synthetics, mostly illegal around the place. Steroids, legal only on prescription. Prescription over-the-counter medications. Again, it's illegal to have it so long as it's got your name on it, not if it's got Warnie's mum's name on it, as we might remember. Okay, so let's have a look at what we can test for. We can certainly test for alcohol, and some of my girlfriends got together to try and talk me out of the drink. Didn't work. The thing about alcohol, I guess, is that, you know, as soon as we put up something like that, people laugh, because it's a very socially accepted form of drug use, particularly for relaxation. And dare I hazard that some of us would have a drink every day. We might only have 1 or 2, but this is how we unwind when we get home from a big day in court or at the office. So, but we do need to think about it, because a lot of people have got alcohol-related problems, and then that leads to, in a lot of cases, domestic violence and kids being unsafe and whatever. So we need to be able to test for it. We've got lots of different ways we can test for alcohol. Same with opiates and opioids. Difference between an opiate and an opioid, if you always wanted to know, is that opiates come from the opium poppy. So it's basically the juice that then gets converted very simply into morphine or codeine. But if they add coal tar extract and hydrochloric acid, they can actually turn the morphine into heroin, as the Bayer company did in the late 1800s. Okay, so good old Bayer, who gave us aspirin, also gave us heroin. And they exported it in huge quantities to the UK. Now, lots of other opioids that are around that are fully synthetic. We can't pick them up on normal testing. We've got to use specific tests to be able to pick up on them. So things like hydromorphone and things like gone a complete mental blank, methadone, things like that. We need to be able to do a special.
Like the commercial tone for that hydromorphone?
I only really refer to it as hydromorphone. I'm not sure.
What would hunters use it for?
It's basically a fully synthetic opioid. So it's one that's made to affect
Pain relief.
Yeah, it is pain relief. Yeah, that's right. But if you have no pain, it doesn't know where to go, so it just goes through the whole body, and that's where we're getting the problems with it. There is one that we're going to get a particular problem with that I really would like you to be aware of if you're not already, and that's a drug called fentanyl. Now, fentanyl's a major player in West Coast US with their big problem that they've got with opioids at the moment. They've got an epidemic on their hands big time, and lots and lots and lots of deaths. Problem with fentanyl is it's 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. Doesn't take much to overdose. If it wasn't bad enough, along came carfentanil, which was originally used as a sedative for elephants, and it's 100 times stronger again. So here's something that is up to 10,000 times stronger than morphine. Have a look at how much it takes to kill. On the left, you've got how much fentanyl it takes to kill. That's that few little white dots there. And on the right-hand side, if you can see it, is how much carfentanil it takes to kill somebody. So lots and lots and lots of deaths in the US. And we're monitoring it in New South Wales and Victoria at the moment, where it's slowly building in intensity. We haven't seen a lot of it here yet. We have the capacity to pick it up, but we haven't picked up too much yet. Don't know about a snake, don't know about an apple, don't know about a tree, but you can guarantee that the major culprit in the Garden of Eden was that green leafy material. Because we've got isotopes taken from hominoid remains in the British Museum going back 1.1 million years, showing signs of herbal drug use, including cannabis. So it's been around for a long time. Before man was man, the guy we used to laugh at as the knuckle dragger, probably helped put a bit of a spring in his walk, but then again. So we can certainly test for that. We can test for the benzodiazepine group. Mother's Little Helper, Valium probably being the best known out of that group, but things like Xanax and Mogadon and all those other ones. Sorry, I can remember all the commercial names for all of those, but I had trouble with the other one. I'll look it up for you before I go. Cocaine we're going to see a lot more of in Queensland, mainly because the price is coming down. Were you aware that Fortitude Valley was the cocaine capital of Australia? Okay. All right. It's coming in from South America, and it's coming in now from Peru rather than having to cross the Andes from Colombia, so it's cheaper already. Then it's coming across on catamarans into Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast boat harbours. So they've only got to bribe 3 or 4 people on a little boat rather than an entire ship's crew. If they lose a load, they only lose a small load, they're not losing a big load. And then it's going into the valley and it's getting distributed amongst outlaw motorcycle gangs, and it's being distributed around Australia. So you're going to see a lot more of it because it's becoming almost as cheap as meth ice now. There's meth ice. There's a meth ice pipe. We can certainly test for that, and sadly we are finding an awful lot of it around the place. Biggest problem we've got in 40 years of counselling and drug testing, I've never come across a drug before that we couldn't do much with. In Australia, we've got about a 1.5% success rate with getting people off meth ice over a 12-month period. And we've got about we've got about 240,000 meth ice addicts in Australia. AWDTS, we've got a 4.6% success rate, and we do something a bit unusual there, and that is that we actually bring these people for testing and for counselling into our own living room at home. And by making it more family oriented, we're getting some results. We're doing a few other things as well. Ecstasy. For those of you who might be tempted to try ecstasy at some stage, because it is a fairly popular party drug, don't. Okay. The old ecstasy is gone. MDMA, methylene dioxymethylamphetamine, disappeared for 3.5 years. So what took its place? Seat up the front here. rather than stand at the back. Welcome. And the problem with it was when it disappeared, something else took its place, and it was basically meth ice mixed with ketamine, which is a horse tranquiliser. So you remember the guys that got into trouble on the Gold Coast? There was a Victorian footballer died about 3 years ago, and there were about 6 others found wandering in shark-infested canals with no idea what was going on. Well, that was this particular drug that was sold as ecstasy. Now MDMA is coming back into Australia. People are saying this is pathetic. What happened to the good stuff? So they now put twice as much MDMA in, and they're also adding synthetic LSD for good measure. So you don't really know what you're getting, and the chances of dehydrating really badly and possibly dying are heightened. And we're seeing this at Groove and the Moo and all these other festivals where people are taking stuff that's designer, but you don't know what the design is. And in fact, the people doing it, they vary their recipe from time to time to experiment a little bit. When you thought it couldn't get any worse, along came Flacker. You heard of the zombie drug?
Yep.
Marketed in Australia as bath salts. You go on the net and it says you can buy bath salts. The age group that it's targeted at is upper primary, lower secondary school. They snort this, they eat it, they smoke it, they inject it, whatever way they put it into their body, it does nasty things. This is the one where you've heard where people attack each other and bite flesh off. Okay? It's here. Steroids. If I told you where we found that packet of steroids, and it wasn't actually in Australia, but it was offshore, you'd be horrified. But steroids are bad news as well. They can destroy livers and kidneys, and they enlarge hearts. So we've got problems with them. Over-the-counter and prescribed drugs of particular interest, Panadeine Fort. People taking 2 Panadeine Fort should not drive for a period or operate machinery for up to 3 hours afterwards. Not clever, because they don't have full control. Valium. Try 18 hours for a 5 milligram Valium. Shouldn't be operating a car or coming to work or whatever. Some antibiotics out there are so powerful that they make you fall asleep within minutes of taking them. Don't come to work. Get that message out to your people. Don't drive. You may fall asleep. Polaramine and Phenergan, which are what? What sort of a drug? Yep, good. Antihistamine. They're also the poor man's sleeping tablet, and particularly Phenergan, where they take a 25 milligram Phenergan and it's good night Irene for about the next 36 hours. People are just out of it. If they push themselves to go to work, they're mad. So lots of things. We're doing drug testing. I don't know if you can read the cartoon there. I thought it was pretty funny at the time, but maybe it loses in the translation. I mean, the reasons that we drug test, obviously we're looking for accurate and timely information. We're looking to identify the sort of drug that somebody's using and possibly the extent of the problem that they've developed. And that will then help us to work out what we're going to do about it, how we're going to manage it, whether we can manage it or not. Object of the exercise is we're wanting to make sure the kids are safe and that other people in the relationship are safe as well. What often happens, and you would have seen it many a time, is when somebody's been drug tested and doesn't get access to their children, all of a sudden for the first time they start to think about their drug use as maybe it not being a good thing. So they start to clean their act up. And this assists with the rehabilitation program. The number of people I've had say to me, we hate this bloody drug testing, but it's keeping me on the straight and narrow because I know I'm going to jail if I breach it on my bail or whatever. Now, the thorny little question of, I want to do a drug test. What drug test am I going to do? Lots of different drug tests out there. Let's have a look at some. Breath testing. If you want to know whether somebody is currently intoxicated, a breath test is a good way to go because it will actually give you a reading. But it's only effective for up to about 24 hours after. So it's a very immediate test. Blood testing, limited use for drugs and alcohol, maybe out to 48 hours. You'll find out whether somebody is intoxicated or fairly close to the time of intoxication, but it doesn't go out much further than that. But in some applications that you want to know what was the go at this particular point when we did this reading because it was within that 48-hour period. Might be for some sort of court matter. Oral fluids. We do a lot of oral fluids testing, so I shouldn't bag it. but it's probably the least effective of all the testing methodologies around. Main reason being that things that are fat soluble won't get picked up in a water soluble test. So cannabis is likely to get picked up maybe for a couple of hours afterwards, and only if we pick the parent drug, not the metabolised carboxy THC. With benzos, we don't pick them up at all. So Valiums and things like that, which we might pick up for up to 6 or 8 weeks in urine, which is way too long, we don't pick up at all in oral fluids testing. So the police roadside testing is of limited value, and any of you who read the blurbs that we put out, we gave you a little bit of a blurb not so long back on a rather startling admission made by a New South Wales police expert in court about the effectiveness of their testing with cannabis. Okay, anybody wants a copy of that, happy to provide. There's a ton of business cards out the front there. You probably think that we're trying to get rid of business cards. There's so many of them there, you're probably right. Look, urine testing is still the gold standard, or as somebody unkindly pointed out, the yellow standard a while back. But the cheats are getting better. The cheats are getting so much better at it. And we've caught so many people recently. We had one guy who was a full strip search in a custodial situation. And as it turned out, I saw the urine exit his penis, but it wasn't his urine as it turned out. And on another occasion, we had somebody where I observed the flow from the penis where it was somebody who was pretty much fully clothed, and it wasn't even their penis, let alone their urine. Okay, people will put things into back passages of the body, and they will have little hollow plastic tubes attached to someone else's urine that's in there, and they'll just clamp the cheeks of their backside together, and it's all neatly attached to the undercarriage, not stapled, as I told one group there recently and had to change it, but taped there. So they just clamp and away they go. So strip searching is not, or strip testing is not all it's cracked up to be. Okay, and same with when we're observing somebody, if they've got a prosthetic penis, and there's models out there you can buy for about $340 US, which look real. They come in 6 different ethnic colours just to make sure nobody dips out. And they've got heat pads, artificial urine with artificial creatinine. So urine testing, talk to me before you go ahead and do urine testing, because you're paying a lot of money for it and you may not get the result that you're after, but it is very good for some things. Sweat testing, forget about it. It's been totally discredited, and there's some major court cases going on in the US because of adulteration of samples. Hair, brilliant. We do probably more hair testing now than we do just about anything else. But how far back do you want to go? If you're wanting to go back 3 months, terrific. If somebody's a bit short on head hair, we've got to look to see if they've got any body hair. Often the bloke who's got no head hair has no body hair because it was quite deliberate that he has no head hair. All right? So we've got to look at a few things there. That's a little chart, and I'll leave a copy of this presentation with you, Alicia, so that you can print it out and everybody can have a copy if you like. And that's a little bit of an idea on roughly how long you can go back looking at stuff. Another problem with the urine test, you know, you get people arrive and, oh, I'm sorry, I've just been to the toilet. They probably have. You know, it was a long drive down. They might have taken an hour to get here. They've had a couple of cups of coffee on a cold morning, and they've had to stop at the servo for a quick pee, and by the time they get to us, we're now going to have to feed them about 500 ml of water, and it'll take an hour or two. You get other people who are telling you they can't pee because they don't want to. They're a bit worried. They're trying to buy some more time. They think if they can stall it for a couple of hours, they may get that last little bit of cannabis out of their system. All right. And we get medical reasons. I mean, people who've got prostate problems, and people who've got urinary tract infections, anyone who's on methadone, the sphincters in the urethra clamp up, so it's very hard getting a urine sample from somebody on methadone. You get shy bladder syndrome, you probably unkindly refer to as stage fright. Paresis is its proper name, and 10% of the population suffer from it. It's real. It's a psychological condition, and some of our people now arrive with their certificate from their psychologist saying diagnosed with paresis. Okay, right. Or people will bullshit to you. Just so you're thinking oral fluids might be a better proposition. Well, dehydration is not your friend here. Dehydration is a big problem. So what we do is we let people have up to 500 ml of water 20 minutes before a test, the drug in the mouth will build up again, and we have far less problems with dehydration, because everything from cigarettes and alcohol and caffeine through to lots of different medications and cannabis itself will dry the mouth out and make it very difficult to get a sample. Who salivates more, males or females?
Males.
No, it's not. It's females. We don't know why exactly, but females have bigger saliva glands. We think it's because way back women used to chew the food for the babies. We don't know that for sure, but we do know you've got bigger saliva glands, and you'll do most of your salivating during the day, not at night, which is why if you check with your male siblings, you'll probably find they've got fewer holes in their teeth, fewer fillings than what you've got, because when the saliva doesn't lubricate, you tend to crack teeth more regularly. So there's a bit of trivia for you. Now, one of the problems we've got with hair testing, for those of you who work in criminal jurisdiction, is that we have real problems with hair testing. In fact, we have real problems with most testing in picking up on date rape. Okay? Now, most people, as you're probably aware, who are raped will take about 12 plus hours before they clean themselves up and feel reasonably presentable to go along with a friend and see the police about it. Well, by that stage, the Rohypnol, which would have been easy to find for days and possibly even a couple of weeks afterwards, they don't use Rohies or Roofies anymore. They've stopped using them. They're using things like GHB, glutahydroxybutyrate, otherwise known as grievous bodily harm or liquid fantasy. This is one where they put it into them and it's gone in about 6 to 8 hours. You can't find it in urine, you can't find it in blood, and you can't find it in hair. It's disappeared. Then you get one like ketamine, the horse tranquilizer, which unfortunately, it's a single administration. Your body produces very small amounts of ketamine. We don't know whether it's from an external source or an internal production source. So there's one of the problems we've got with hair testing. It's one of the few, I'm happy to say, but just be aware it's absolutely useless for date rape. I'm going to give you each a copy, or you'll have access to getting a copy of a court order template. Needless to say, it's got our name smacked all over it, but it might save you half an hour or an hour of putting a template together somewhere. Butcher it as much as you like and turn it into something that works for you. That's our little crisis line, 1300 drug test. Makes it easy to remember, or 1300 378 483. If you get stuck, the number of calls we get from people on the steps of the courthouse is quite incredible. This has just been put on us by the court. What do you reckon? So we can talk you through it. All right, there's usually somebody there who can talk you through it. Yes?
Sorry, on that template, the drug and alcohol hair template, the alcohol testing, is that an ETG test?
Yes, it is, yeah. If you'd rather go to a CDT test or to an LFT, you can do that. It's just a matter of changing it, but you need to know what you're doing. I'll talk more about that because that's a really good point you've brought up. There are certainly different types of tests for alcohol that we can use, and with hair testing, we think we've got the most comprehensive with the ETG testing. But we'll talk about the variations there in a minute, because I've actually got a little slideshow presentation on it. Thanks. Yeah, no, it's a good question. Why or how does hair testing work? Well, what happens is the alcohol or the drug gets into the bloodstream, and the blood then goes into the live hair follicle beneath the scalp. And within 7 to 10 days, that live hair follicle has died off and has poked its little head through the top of the scalp. Once it pokes its head through the top of the scalp as dead hair, the drug or the alcohol is trapped forever in the cortex. That means that poor old Tutankhamun, 2,500 years dead, got scalped not so long back, and they found that he was a massive opium fiend. Napoleon, 7 locks of his hair all neatly date stamped with letters. They found over a 3-year period that he had ever increasing amounts of arsenic in his system, probably murdered by the British with French connivance. So that'll be a good movie that'll come out at some stage, no doubt. But what it does, it gets trapped in the hair. As long as the hair is there, anything on my head will show that I drink too much booze, right? Which is why I haven't gone for the ETG test, because unfortunately we socialise a lot, and so we tend to drink more alcohol than is good for us at our place. And this is a real problem for a lot of people where maybe they might only drink once a week, but it might be a huge drink that once a week. That'll get embedded in the hair as well. Same with drugs. What can we test for? Our standard panel is in opiates, amphetamine, methamphetamine, cocaine, THC being cannabis, and PCP, angel dust, which is it's a precursor drug that's often put into ecstasy these days because it's a hallucinogenic. So that's the basic panel. There's about 40 drugs and metabolites we can test for, and I can certainly give you a full list of the drugs that we test for in the standard panel. If you want to add benzos on there, you can do that. It's about $100 more. The basic panel is about $340. It's about another $100 to add benzos on if you want to. You can test for synthetic cannabinoids. We test for about 25 different ones, and they're the most recent that have been found out there. So this is the best way of testing for synthetic cannabis, hair testing. In urine testing, it's too hit and miss. The alcohol ETG, which I'll talk about in a minute, and any other drug you want to know about, let's know and we'll see what we can find for you. But the hair ETG testing, ethyl glucuronide is the metabolite. It's what the liver turns alcohol into before it pumps it into the bloodstream. And because it's liquid, it goes really easily through the body, and it's very easily detectable. And it's put directly into the hair. Not directly into the hair, but it comes in as ETG rather than actual alcohol itself. Now, the beauty of an ETG test is that this will go back, if you're wanting to test 3 months, it'll go back 3 months. And the CDT test, the carbohydrate deficiency transferrin test, which is either a urine or a blood test, they can do them either way, it only goes back about a fortnight. And the CDT test will only it'll only really tell you if somebody's got a problem. Because what the CDT is doing, carbohydrate deficiency transferrin, what it's looking at is this person nourished well enough? Are they eating well enough to be able to produce the red blood cells with the iron that's needed to carry the oxygen to the brain? And what it does is it picks up where there's a deficiency there. So somebody has to really have given it a good hit over a fortnight for you to be able to pick it up. And it's only when you get a value of 3 or higher that you know you've got an absolute winner. Anything lower than 3, you should combine it with another test, which then ups the expense a bit. Liver function test, off to their local friendly doctor who might bulk bill them, send them off to Sully Nick or QML who might bulk bill them so it costs them nothing. The liver function test will tell you from 2 particular enzymes that are tested for whether they have been abusing alcohol or not, and whether the liver is starting to react badly. So that's a good one for picking up on long-term damage or even short-term damage to the liver, the LFT. And that's a doctor's referral to a pathology. The CDT is a doctor's test, and the ETG test, you don't need a doctor to refer to us, you can just refer your people directly to us. The beauty of the ETG test is that it will look at a 3-month period and it will tell you that it was 0 to very low alcohol use during the period, or it was moderate alcohol use, or it was heavy alcohol use. The bad news for me and for some of you is that 4 standard alcoholic drinks a day is heavy drinking. Okay, and it will come up as a heavy drinker if you've had 4 a day. Now, you can have 3 a day and still come in as a moderate drinker. Here's your problem with the with the ETG test. It doesn't pick up on binge drinking. If somebody had all 21 of those drinks that they're allowed to have a week and be a moderate drinker, had them all on Friday night, just before they pick the kids up, they're still going to come in as a moderate drinker on the test. So this is where you might want to combine it. You might want to combine that with an LFT, a liver function test, to see whether they're doing the right thing or not. But that's a good one to talk to us on the phone anytime you like. So look, here's what I'm trying to do. What test do you reckon? You had a question?
A lot of the questions we get sometimes in court, particularly with regards to who pays for the test, is how much does it cost? Will you be providing us with a price list?
Yeah, you'll definitely get one of those. The CDT test is around about $100. We don't do that one. The LFT should cost you nothing. Our hair drugs test is around about $500. So it's not a cheap test, but it's the most comprehensive of any of them. But yeah, we will give you a price list. We'll give you probably enough stuff to drown you, so that you've got plenty to look at. Look, when we're doing testing, there's a few considerations we have to make, and I'll have a look at them first up. Collector accreditation and training. Some of the laboratories, sadly, do very little training with their staff for the hair testing. We make sure that our people do a nationally accredited course. We're lucky because we have our own RTO, which means that we can conduct this training. We own the course. Not only do we train our own people in drug testing, including hair testing, but we train some of our competitors. I've trained a lot of people at QML, Lavity Pathology in New South Wales, HealthScope. We do all HealthScopes training in Australia, and that includes clinical labs in Victoria. So long as they've done that training, terrific. And then they've got to do some extra training on the specifics of any laboratory they're using. So if they're using psychmedics, they've got to do the psychmedics training module, which is a couple of hours. If they're doing HASTA at any stage, HASTA in Victoria's collection, there's about an hour's module there. There's an hour's module for QML, there's an hour's module for South Australian pathology. But beware of going to places where they haven't trained people, specifically in hair testing. Okay, there are quite a number of cowboys out there, and it will come to grief when it becomes obvious in court that people aren't following things like chain of custody procedures and whatever. We spend a lot of time emphasising to our people that if you haven't got chain of custody, you've got a big pile of doggy poo. You know, there's nothing that can be used there. It will fall over if it goes to court. So we train them up really thoroughly on how to do chain of custody properly, so you can prove that from when it was taken to when it arrived at the laboratory, we know every step of the way who had it, and then we get the results back and we're able to give them to you and certify that. We give them a little bit of legal training, as in understanding aspects of the Privacy Act and understanding National Measurements Act requirements and things like that with testing. So that's really good for them. Also, we only use nurses, doctors, workplace health and safety professionals, biochemists or forensic toxicologists like myself. They're the only people that we use for doing the collection. Laboratory accreditation. The bad news is there is no Australian standard for hair testing. So when people start, when the judge starts to say to you, I want NATA accredited testing, sorry, Your Honour, we can't give you that because National Association of Testing Authorities is an Australian accreditation authority, and we don't have an Australian standard to accredit to. What, however, they will do is there's an ISO called 17025, which is an international standard for drug testing. All laboratories that are accredited must comply with that particular standard. So whereas NATA can't actually accredit in Australia, people can get accreditation in other areas on that ISO, and then they may transfer the hair testing to it. We are using psychmedics in the States for about 97% of our tests, and one of the reasons we're using them is firstly, they are nationally accredited by the ANSI ASQ, which is the NATA equivalent over there. They're also looking at asking NATA for accreditation here as soon as it's an Australian standard. And they have got a specific accreditation, which I've got a copy of for you, so that you can see that it is specifically for hair testing. It's not just lumped on the back of other things. So that's one of the main reasons why we use them. We also use them because of laboratory experience. Having going about 27 years now with hair testing, they invented it in the States. Dr. Michael Schaefer, who heads up that laboratory, is the man who is still running the laboratory, and he is a wealth of information on hair testing. Their average staff turnover in the States at that laboratory is 14 years. That's not bad. Tell me anywhere else where you're going to get a 14-year average turnover. I got a bit excited and carried away here. I was telling you either 1,000 or 1 million tests per month. It's closer to 100,000 tests a month that psychmedics are doing. 5 laboratories in Australia are probably doing about 1,000 tests a month between them. And that's one of the reasons why we managed to get such a good price. And they're also putting through massive amounts, whereas some of the big laboratories here have got 5 and 6 GCMS and LCMS machines dedicated to different types of testing. They've got about 40 of those machines, $500,000 machines, just dedicated to hair testing that they're doing on a daily basis. So. Cut-off levels. The Australian cut-off levels for the labs here are much higher than what the international standard recommends. Now, psychmedics have gone with the international standard, as have most laboratories around the world. I have not been able to find out why the Australian laboratories have opted to go for lower cut-offs, but I can tell you that there's a problem with lower cut-offs, and there's a problem if you don't have a thorough wash process, and that is that you can get external contamination. And one of those reports you gave me a look at, I'm concerned about external contamination in one of them. Because somebody who gets cocaine or cannabis on their hands or in their hair because they're around smokers or whatever, you've got to have a really thorough hair wash process. Psychmedics do 5 washes over 3 3/4 hours, and then they look at their final wash, and if there's more than 10% of the concentration of the sample that they found in the hair, if there's more than 10% or higher in that wash, they'll deem that there's possibly external contamination and they won't go any further with the test. We've had external contamination problems in Australia where we've got 2 lawsuits on currently, one New South Wales Police, one AFP, where they sacked on the basis of results that came in. They didn't get much of a rundown on what the results meant. Both laboratories have since admitted that they couldn't fully rule out the possibility of external contamination, and so the lawsuits are on, and New South Wales Police, the AFP and West Australian Police have moved holus bolus across to using Psychmedics in the States, in California, as have New York Police Department, as have the FBI. Now, FBI have got Quantico Laboratory, and they said, we're happy with Quantico for most things, but Psychmedics are hands down. It's a lady on Mazir. We'll get our hair testing done here because of their wash process. They've written a white paper, which I'm happy to send a copy of as well. So that's really handy for us. The hair wash process is critical because if somebody's been hanging around people who've been smoking, they can get it caught up in their hair, and even a bit of a wash process won't get it all out. They've got to have a really thorough wash process. One of the Australian labs does a 30-second wash process, and when I challenged them on it, they said, oh, it's good enough for most things. And I thought, okay. Yeah, training and legal aspects, I think I talked about that. Results, when the results come in, that's the interesting bit for you. Has everyone got copies of those
No, I can
that you sent?
No, I can send later.
Okay.
I
I can talk about those with you later, or I can talk about them now.
I can run and get some copies and hand them out.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'll go do that.
If that's all right, Alicia.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
All right. Because this is the problem. You get this lovely lab report comes back, and it's telling you all this gobbledygook, and you guys weren't trained as scientists in most cases. You can't be expected. You're the GP. You know, you're trying to manage all the stuff coming in from everywhere. What we do is we write a little mini report, which is part of the cost of the test. I write that one myself when the results come in to try and turn it into English. I don't have a science degree. I'm a forensic toxicologist, a bit the way a lot of lawyers in the old days came up through articles. They didn't actually have a degree in law. So I got mine by sitting an exam at the end and showing them that I was at least clever in one little area, if not all of them. So I can talk English, and if you are wondering what the hell it means, just ring and we'll talk like normal people, and you'll have a good grip on what it actually means by the end of it. And you can ring us anytime. There's always somebody there. Okay. Costs, yeah. Urine and saliva testing, anything from $80 to $140 a test. We're at the 85 end because we're making plenty of money out of that. Thank you very much. We don't need to charge a lot. Hair testing prices range anything from about $330 to $880. I think QML are charging $750. We charge $340 for the same test as far as the courts are concerned. Now, what I want to say is that my good friend Charlie Appleton at QML is a good bloke and he's very honest. They're not ripping you off. They're doing about 2.5 times the number of drugs that they're testing than what we do. But they're testing a whole heap of stuff that the court's not even vaguely interested in. They're interested in it if they're a GP before the AMA, because it's a whole heap of stuff out of their own medical cabinets. But for average Joe on the street, he's never heard of it, he's not going to use it. So what we did was we negotiated to get a compressed panel of about 40 drugs and metabolites, which are the ones that the courts are interested in 97% of cases. That's how we do it. It's not the QML or the others ripping you off. And also, because they're doing small numbers, they may have to put through less than a batch of 64, and that ups their prices. So Ours are just going through tens of thousands a day. Referral process for us, you don't need a GP referral, you just ring. And you can ring directly to the couple of doctors that we've got in the city here, or you can get hold of Marion where there's no parking cost at Chandler in the eastern suburbs. And we're on the Gold Coast. We've got 3 places on the Sunshine Coast. Anywhere else in Queensland you want to know about, we're in all the major centres. Harvey Bay, Rockhampton, Mackay, Townsville, Cairns, and looking at expanding. We've got 34 centres at this stage. I had one 2.5 years ago, so yeah, it does take its toll trying to get this up and running very quickly. Good on you, thanks Alicia. I'll just get you to whack it through there now. Yeah, I'm only 27. What doing all this has done to me. Okay. Is it big enough for you to see? Okay. One of the things you're going to find with these is that this is Lavity. Lavity are in New South Wales. They're QML affiliates. And so this test has actually been done at QML's laboratory here in Brisbane. Now, they use different, they'll talk about micrograms per litre, and some will talk about picograms per milligram, and some will talk about nanograms per mil or nanograms per 10 milligrams. It's easy with a little calculator for me to just make apples and apples, all right? But when you look at these and they come from 3 different places, you're going to go, they're talking different languages in each one, and they are. Why are they doing it like that? I think it's because scientists like being scientists and like being a bit mysterious and don't want us being able to work out exactly what they're on about. With this particular test, the thing that interested me was that they'd found a bit of cannabis there, and the cut-off for the initial test was 50 nanograms per mil as per the Australian standard, which is good. And then when they've done the final test, they found that there was 400 micrograms per litre or nanograms per mil. That's a pretty heavy little dose of cannabis. Either somebody with this one has just smoked in the last 6 to 8 hours, or they've had an absolute shed load on a regular basis. It's a one-off in the last 6 to 10 hours, or they're a very, very steady smoker. This is a high reading. Most of our reads come in at around about 100 to 150 or a little bit less. So by looking at it, you can say, well, it might be this and it might be that. You can't tell you exactly what it is. All right? Anyone got any questions about that particular one? Yes?
So is it the case that with this particular person, we need to test again within a reasonable period of time so we can compare that almost?
Yep, you can actually do testing. If you did 3 tests a week, if you did one at the start of the week, one on day 4 and one on day 7, they can do what they call a ratio of a ratio, and they can actually see whether they've continued to use during the period. But there has to be 3 tests, no more than 4 days apart, for them to be able to calculate that. And then they'll look at what the ratio of the creatinine and the drug is, and then they'll put them against each other as well. And it actually gives you quite a good idea of whether somebody's coming down or whether they're going up. One of the problems with urine testing is if they've been a heavy user, they may still be testing positive for quite some time to come. And depending on how much they're hydrating, that can go up and down a fair bit, and you really can't tell just looking at a second result whether they've used again or not.
So if, because we can't test every few days, there are more general limits on us. If we were to test him again in, say, 4 to 6 weeks,
Yep.
and the figures came down.
Yep. Good. You've just raised something really good there. How long do you reckon you can detect cannabis in urine for? 4 to 6 weeks? Yeah. I bring it down a little bit, probably about 3 to 4 weeks. Canadian prison studies they did under cameras. 18 days it took the last guy. They had an absolute bongathon in one of the prisons there. And they had the cameras trained on them, and then they took them off it and they had the cameras trained on them. So the only studies worth their salt are ones done under camera. So what they found was 18 days for people who'd had massive doses to get it out of their system. There's another one they did where one bloke managed 28 days. Anybody goes over 28 days, I usually congratulate them on being the new world record holder, which they don't find very funny usually. But I think it's worthwhile pointing out to clients that don't try and blow smoke up, where, because it just won't wash. Some of the judges are very well educated on it. And the more seminars that we do, the more educated that the other side's going to be as well. So about 3 to 4 weeks is pretty right. Once that 4-week period's over, if it's still there, it's new use, definitely new use. But you can work it out fairly quickly.
So, but when you're testing for marijuana,
Yep.
does your organisation automatically, if it shows up positive metabolites, will you automatically do the MS testing?
Oh, yes.
Like
If it's a client, they've got to pay for the test. So we'll say to them, we should be sending it off for mass spectrometry,
Yeah.
right? And they'll tell us yay or no. If they're not paying for it, we don't send it. But we do tell them that this is going to be a bit lame in court without the mass spec. And some of them will agree to it and some won't. If, however, it's an organisation that's put it through, we've got agreements with all organisations that we will put it through the confirmatory test as required by the Australians.
So how long do you keep the sample for?
We don't. We get the sample going the same day, and even if we test on a Saturday, which is unusual, we've got arrangements where we get rid of it on the Saturday, and it's refrigerated until it goes. The laboratory will keep sample B for 3 months. Sample B is what they call the referee sample, and it actually belongs to the person, not the organisation or the legal body, but it actually belongs to an individual person, and they can say they want it tested again. If you're advising your person whether to go for a second test on their referee sample, I would suggest that you don't, because they only need to find 1 nanogram of it in the referee sample and they're gone. It's deemed to be there.
So should I, as a lawyer, if I'm testing for marijuana in my orders, be saying if it tests positive in the immunoassay, that it must be tested?
Yeah, it's not a bad idea actually, that it's a
Because
requirement that
otherwise
they
it's
pay
only
for.
an
They pay
immunoassay,
for the. That's right, the requirement that
And
they
I
pay for the
can't
other.
compare over a
Yeah,
period of
I mean it's sufficient if you're trying to have somebody not looking good in court. They don't need to go for the GCMS or the LCMS because it's just a raw result and they're going to look pretty silly and they can't do anything with it. But if it's your client and you want them to look good, yeah, go for the mass spec.
Or if they're telling me,
Yep.
in a children's law, if they're telling me I'm actually reducing my use,
Yes.
then I want to test them over a period of time. I need to have BMS. Don't I?
That's right. Yep, absolutely, because that's the only thing that give you levels. So yeah, good question.
Is that in your template?
Probably not. I would reckon that you could probably fit that one in there, or if you really get stuck, just send me an email and I'll send one through to somebody, and then you can all pirate it from there.
We had a lot of people saying to us that their cannabinoids are showing up because they are being contaminated by people in their vicinity who smoke, even though it's urine.
Massive.
Is
Massive
that
smoke.
is that something that will show up on a test?
Good.
And will your MS show that that might be hard?
Good, yes it will. Passive smoking does give a small registration, but it's a bit like my son when he was 16 when I found him driving the big porcelain bus one night and screaming for Ralph, and he tried to tell me that it was the other guys in the car that were drinking and he just inhaled the fumes. Yes, you do inhale some fumes and you do get a slight reading. Same with cannabis. I've been to a cannabis burn on Stradbroke Island where we were coughing and gasping and not one of us got a registration.
So the 4 stars is overkill.
Yeah. They've done some really good studies on passive smoking, and the best one they did was on a US submarine where half the crew got to bong on for about a week and the other half got to suck in second-hand smoke. And the guys who bonged on, they had massive readings, and the guys with the second-hand smoke, highest registration they got was 12 nanograms from any of the studies. The 15 cut off at the laboratory to make sure that no innocents are hung. So, yeah, good question. But we can get around that one, yeah, for sure. Yes?
I had a client earlier in the year who tested positive for methamphetamines, and
Yep.
her reasoning for that because she said she had an old box of cold and flu tablets from before they took the stronger drugs out of them.
Yep.
And she said that was the reason for that. Is that likely? It was in a hair follicle and urine test. It came
On
up
an
that reading.
initial immunoassay,
Yeah.
methamphetamine will come up as amphetamine and methamphetamine because it is an amphetamine. So with that initial test, you can't be sure what you're dealing with. When they put it through your mass spec process, whether it's a gas or liquid, meth is only meth. If it comes back from a hair test that it was meth, it was meth. If it comes back from a urine test with the double mass spec having been done and says it was meth, it was meth. There's only one thing will come up as meth in a confirmatory test, and it's meth. Some people have a reaction with a particular type of blue cheese that may give a positive read in the initial stage for meth in a urine test or an oral fluids test. Right, all the blue cheese lovers ducking for cover. And we get people who've taken particular medications, like Somac will give you a false positive sometimes. Somac, the anti-reflux drug, will give you a false positive for THC. Whereas what's the other anti-reflux drug that's fairly common? Nexium. Sorry? Nexium, things like that. That may give you a positive read on the initial test for meth. So there are things that will give you an initial test for meth. People shouldn't be worried about it because when it gets put through the double mass spec process, it comes out as nothing found. All right?
What about Duramine?
Duramine, good on you. Okay. Bless its heart, Duramine. We've got 2 doctors in the business with us who will not prescribe Duramine. They reckon it's a really dangerous drug. The only people who really want to take Duramine are trying to lose weight, which means that they're my size or maybe a bit smaller. That means they've probably got high blood pressure as well. Duramine's an amphetamine that puts the blood pressure through the roof. It also restricts, it's a vasoconstrictor, so it actually makes your veins and arteries shrink in size. So you're trying to pump more blood through the veins and arteries, and they're narrower. So the chances of a stroke or a heart attack are increased. It's not a safe drug, but it does show up as sometimes as methamphetamine in an initial test, but when it comes back in the next test, it'll just come up as nothing found or amphetamine, depending on the level. That's a good one.
Is that the same with dexamphetamine?
Yeah, Dexies will come up as amphetamine because they are amphetamine. Pseudoephedrine is an amphetamine, so it will come up as amphetamine. If there's a lot of pseudoephedrine in the cold and flu mixture, it may even come up as meth in an initial test, but the confirmatory test will sort it. There's always confirmatory testing done on hair. It's automatic. No ifs, buts or maybes. It's all paid for, part of the process. That might answer a little bit more of your question too. I forgot to tell you that bit.
Is it true that they don't manufacture pseudoephedrine into drugs in Australia anymore?
No, you can still get them with, or you can get them without. It depends on whether the doctor actually prescribes it now.
Ah, right. Yep.
So you can ask for it, but they usually won't give it to you.
Yes.
All right. Yep, we've still got a little bit of time. Can I have a look at? Yeah, another one there. Now this was an interesting one. Curemel are very thorough. Now, they've given you a list there of what they found and what the cut-offs are, but you really need to know, I guess, what the actual cut-off levels are if you're going to make any deductions from this. And they haven't told you what the actual cut-off levels are. We tell you what the cut-off levels are and what level we found. Okay, and that's really important for you to be able to work out, have we got a problem or haven't we? Because if you look at the promethazine there, which has come in at 60 picograms per milligram, that's a really low reading. And anyone know what that particular drug is? It's an antihistamine. Sometimes people would use it as an anti-anxiety medication, but it's mostly used as an antihistamine. So do we really care whether they found that one? Probably not. But your MDMA, that's a very low reading at 311, and the cut-off for it is 200. Okay, your cocaine, the cut-off for it's 200, so that's a low reading as well. When you get to your benzylglycinine, which is one of the metabolites of cocaine, it's fairly low because 50 is the cut-off for it. The cocothalene, which is only ever found when you've got a combination of cocaine and alcohol together. So it's a metabolite of cocaine if there's alcohol used concurrently, and it's a pretty low read as well.
Now, the one that worries me is that they've commented on the D9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is cannabis. Okay, now that's a very low read, but I've got a bigger problem with it, and that is if you have a look down the bottom, and it talks about that they looked at the wash, right, and the wash came out at 176. If psychmedics get more than 10% of the value of the drug they found in the wash, so let's say that D9 was 14.4 or higher with psychmedics, they would have said this could be external contamination. You've got a wash of 176. It's actually more in the wash than there was in the actual hair when they tested it. It's probably external contamination. I couldn't put my hand on my heart and say that, but I would have to say to the court, on the balance of probability, that's what it is. Okay.
Do people ever frustrate the testing that way by just rubbing pot in their hair or something?
It's a waste of good hooch, but yeah, I guess some of them do. We've actually had people who've deliberately rubbed methamphetamine into their hair to see whether we'd pick up on the fact that it was externally placed in the hair, and the laboratory did. I was going to say we did, I didn't, but the laboratory certainly did. Yeah. This next one, the Omega one, yeah. The only read there that's of any concern is the methamphetamine read, and it's a 200 cutoff. So 718 there is pretty high. Now they're saying the confirmation cutoff is 500, but the International Association says it should be at 200. So even though their cutoff's at 500, 700 plus is a reasonable sort of read. My take on that would be that that person has probably used 2 or 3 times over a 3-month period, has used meth. So we haven't missed them. Now with hair testing we might miss a single use, but we probably won't miss a second use in the 3-month period, and we certainly won't miss a third use plus. So that one is, it's not a bad example there actually of just how many times somebody's used. So it's 2 to 3 times in the month. If it was really low quality stuff, it might even be 4 or 5 times in that month, but it's a fairly low read. Now, if you've got a 3-month sample and you want to know, my client tells me that we've got, we used really heavily a month ago because it was Christmas, but we haven't smoked anything in the last 2 months. You can actually ask for segmental testing, and we can cut the 3.9 centimetres into 1.3 centimetre strands, and we can test each strand and give you a reading on each one, but it's 3 times the price. How many segments do you want? Multiply by that many times on the dollar value, but we can do it. Yeah.
So that doesn't work for the ETG, does it? Because it infuses the whole.
Well, the ETG you can actually get a segmental test as well. Yep. But that's expensive. I mean, you're talking, if you're doing 3 segments, you're talking $1,500 odd there. But it will give you the monthly read. So if somebody says that they went on a bender for a month while they were on holidays, they may be able to demonstrate that by doing segmental testing. So it's a good question. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I think we've sort of blitzed it. The only things would be that if you're worried about how much hair we're going to take, we cover basically 1 knuckle for a standard test. It's about 100 hairs. We lift the back layer of the hair up on women first, so that the only way they're going to find it afterwards is they'll feel a bit of a hole there about the size of a 5 or a 10 cent piece, but it can't be seen because the hair's dropped back down. With blokes who've got shorter hair, there's going to be a few little tiny bald spots around the place because we'll take it from a few places to not make it too obvious. That's not one of our haircuts. Any other questions, guys? I think we're pretty much right on time.
Any kind of questions?
When you think of those questions as you're lying awake at night worrying about what I said today, just write them down and ring me tomorrow or whatever. Sure.
And you said all the poppy seed debate.
I can. All the poppies. If they're untreated poppy seeds coming in from South America, almost certainly you will get a read for morphine.
If you buy them from Coles in the bakery section.
Yep. Depends on whether they're getting them in from. Now, where Coles bakery section gets most of their stuff from is Ireland. It's already pre-made bread. All they've got to do is cook it, and it comes in from Ireland frozen. So it depends on where the Irish are getting their poppy seeds from. Look, it varies. And anytime we get, it's a very good question actually, because we had one the other day where the guy was just given the straight result of 400 nanograms of morphine was found. And this was in a urine test. And so they were all set to absolutely hammer him in court. And I saw the result come through because the other side sent it through and said, we don't buy this. He said he's only had codeine. Anyway, there was no trace of codeine there. What that said to me was, he's had poppy seeds, and he's had quite a few poppy seeds, probably a big piece of orange poppy seed cake, about 4 to 6 hours ago, because it hasn't started to metabolise at all. There should have been codeine present, because morphine turns into codeine and codeine turns into morphine. If it was morphine you had first, which is the poppy seed, he should have metabolised. Well, you don't metabolise for about 4.5 to 5 hours later. It's not in the urine until then. So, yeah, you can find poppy seed, and you've got to be very careful with it. If in doubt, sing out, all right, ring us. I'm happy talking with you, because the better that you, the more you understand, the more you're going to use us and the more money we're going to make. It's that simple. We educate you, we educate the courts. Everybody moves across to hair testing because it's so good. But you become experts, the judges love it. They will rely on you more and more and more. You'll feel confident. So ring us, and we've got some folk, a couple of you from here even, who ring us fairly regularly, and we have quite long chats, and that's fine. That's what I'm there for. All right. So thanks for your attention, and I look forward to catching up with you along the track somewhere.